Thank you for joining us on the Going Deeper podcast, a ministry of Fathom Church in Littleton, Colorado. You will never get to the bottom of the depths that are in Christ for you. And our hope with this podcast is that it will help you go deeper with God. So let's dive into this episode of the Going Deeper podcast. What's up, church? This is your host, Kyle Knight, and welcome to the Going Deeper podcast, a podcast we just have conversations, hopefully helping you go deeper in your relationship with God. We're here at Fathom Church in the podcast studio with our very own missions and events minister, Karina Bost.
Hey.
Hi, Karina. And Chris Martin, lead pastor. Hello, Chris.
Greetings and salutations.
Greetings and salutations. Hey, if you saw the title of this episode, we are going to be talking about church problems.
Yeah, I've got a lot of problems with you people, and that's
all the problems you have with Fathom Church.
I thought this was about my problems with all of the people at our church. Is that not what we're talking about?
This is the airing of grievances.
Yeah, this is Chris. I got a lot of problems with you people.
He just pulled out a whole list of
and it's
names,
time.
And he's gonna
We're gonna go
all.
person by person. This is gonna be a 6-hour podcast. We'll start with the A's.
This will be the most listened to podcast that we've ever had before. But in all seriousness, Pastor Chris, what do we talk about when we're talking about church problems?
Yeah. Okay, so the world, the church world, the Christian world, the evangelical world specifically, we talk about church hopping and church shopping pretty frequently. People are often coming to Fathom looking for a new church, and we'll ask the question, okay, where were you at before? And they'll share that, and a lot of those times they left the church for I moved or we were there for a long time and just didn't feel we were still connected, or the new pastor didn't really love or disagreed with some sort of move that they were making. And it just got me thinking, how do you process and what do you do with a situation where you got a problem with your church? Like you don't like something that's going on. Maybe you don't agree with something a decision that's being made. Maybe there's a new staff member and you don't like that person, or you think they just rub you the wrong way, or you just think, man, they're not as gifted as I would like, or they aren't doing the job as well as whether it's from small all the way up to big issues, like how do you handle problems in your church? And how do you really get to the place to discern whether it's a big deal or a small deal? And if it's a deal breaker, how do you break away from your church? And so, we talk a lot about like, hey, you should be involved in church. You should find a good church. I hope you have a church home. You should make this church your church home. You should give, you should serve, you should kind of go all in with your church. But what happens when things just start to disintegrate a little bit? That's what I'd like to talk about today. Not that any of us have ever experienced that. No. So certainly not.
Do we want to talk about our own experiences with this?
I'm okay at whatever level we want to. I mean, mine are a little bit different because I've been in vocational professional ministry almost since it was like a year and a half, 2 years after I got saved in high school. So mine's a little different than just like a true congregant. But I think we can lean into our own experience, but then also we can talk some anecdotal experiences that we've had, and also throw out some theoretical experiences and things like that. So, yeah.
Well, Karina, what are your first thoughts on this whole topic of church problems?
Yeah, I think I have, as an adult, I grew up as a pastor's kid, so that was a really unique position. My dad was always my pastor. I went to church where he went. But when we were adults, we ended up at several church plants that kind of dissolved. And then we ended up at a big church that we kind of ended up having some problems theologically with. We didn't really agree with their take on the Bible. So then we were looking for another church, and through all of the experiences we had, I decided, I was like, I'm not going to go to a church until I find a church that meets all of this criteria. And I had a physical list of things I was looking for. And we would go to churches and like, they only checked half. Oh, there was still one. I don't know. whatever. And my dad kept telling me, you just need to find a church. Like what your list is heaven, and you're not going to find that on earth. And I was stubborn enough that I was like, no, I'm going to keep looking till I find it. And finally I realized the truth of his words. And I realized that you're going to find brokenness in each church. Like there is no perfect church. And he's like, you just need to go to a place, you need to commit to it, and you need to go deep. You need to find a way to serve and get connected. And so that was kind of my stance on church, that was like, I'm going to wait till I find the perfect church, and that's where I'm going to go. And I learned really quickly that that's
I'd
a
love
dream.
to see that list. And I would love to just know how much you had to sacrifice to come to Fathom. Actually, I probably wouldn't, because then back to last week, I'd get stressed out and, end up with, a big tub of Bluebell or something. So yeah.
I was going to say, you never had a problem with the pastor growing up, right?
No,
I disagree with his theology.
Never disagree with Dad.
Yeah.
Never disagree with that. So, okay. Chris, when is it like, when thinking about like the problems that people kind of have with churches, like when is it like a legitimate kind of issue, like things to really think about when you go to a church and be like, man, is that a deal breaker? Is that part of, like Karina said, like part of my list? And when is it things that you're like, yeah, that's ridiculous?
Well, so I think there's a spectrum here that we should at least consider. And a lot of this is, I'm making it up as we go, so we'll see how it all comes out.
Sure.
But let's say category 1 is superficial. I think there are superficial things that some people make a big deal out of, and it's just a marker of immaturity.
Give us some examples.
I'll give you some examples. Yeah, from my own personal experience. I worked at a church once, and in this church, I may have shared this on this podcast. I don't know if I have or not, but in this church, for whatever reason, it was a church that was older. There were a lot of older people. The church had been around for multiple decades. And for some reason in this church, every classroom had a piano in it. Like every Sunday school classroom had a piano, like an upright piano sitting on the wall with like a little plaque on it saying who donated that piano,
memorial piano.
Yeah, it's like like the Dorothy Wilson.
You did say
memorial.
That it was either in a sermon or
I can't remember when I said that. I feel
yeah.
But at one point we wanted to remove some of these pianos because it was like, ain't no Sunday school class playing piano anymore. There's not like a hymn sing in the third grade classroom on Sunday anymore. I understand that historically that may have been the case, but that's not how, a modern kids Sunday school class. And so we wanted to remove the pianos, and you wouldn't believe the outlash that happened in that. I mean, because it was, well, that's my great grandmother's memorial piano. And you can't, and I don't want to just totally disparage on that, because that has some meaning, and I get that. But that seems like there were people who left the church over it. Seems like a superficial thing. You hear rumors and things like that of arguments of carpet color choices and, aesthetic choices. And I can't believe they got rid of, the way that we've always, quote, always done things, which was this last 6 years that I've been here or whatever.
Went from pews to
chairs. things that we would say are superficial. Yeah. I would say that is not a real problem. Like, you know what? Some things are fights that are worth fighting, and some things you just got to get over it. And that's one of those things in my mind. So superficial things. Can you guys think of any experiences that you've had? Like I've had people, I know this is the ongoing joke at Fathom, but like I've had multiple people say, oh, the ceiling's too low at your church.
Yeah. Which is funny until somebody seriously leaves.
And we haven't had anybody leave.
Right.
We've had people not come back because of the ceiling height. And I just think, again, back to Karina, back to your point, if your list of, what makes the check marks for a church for us, if one of your marks is height of ceiling, well, that to me feels a bit superficial.
Yeah. And I think for me, Also growing up in the church and being really involved, I think a lot of what I heard was a lot of those lists that had to do with the build, like physical, superficial things that were like very, and seriously, what you were saying was checking out, like I've heard all of those before in my church growing up, that it was just like, because it was, a church that had been around for a really long time, and you get lead pastors in every 10 years or so, something like that, and different staff members, like things of that nature are bound to change, like pews changing into chairs and the uproar that causes with some people. Seriously, the color of carpet, the color of the paint on the walls, different stuff like that. Like I've witnessed a lot of that stuff, and most of the growing up, most of the things that the problems that I heard of or that I was aware of in the church of people, what made people leave, that was a decision to leave, is a lot of those superficial things, that like small things that as a kid, I thought those were legitimate big things of like, yeah, how dare you change that? That's been there forever. I think growing up in a church too, especially if you've been there since a kid, going through the youth program, all that stuff, when you see some of those things change, I think it's realistic for you to kind of have those thoughts of like, oh man, they're changing that stuff. But for that to be a reason that you're like, I am out of here, like that's silly.
So let's say superficial is one category, okay? And I would say that's a dumb reason to leave a church.
Yep.
Okay. It's probably I wouldn't say it's a dumb reason not to go to a church, but it's pretty far down on the pecking order. But if you are a part of a church and they change something superficial, I think that's a dumb reason to leave. But now let's move to the second category, and I'll call this category, if the first one is superficial, the second one is preferential. Okay. Now let's move into preferences.
Yeah.
Now you could say, oh, the carpet color is a preference, but let's just level up a little bit.
Right.
Preference then starts to move into the world of topics like church size, style, personalities, secondary kind of ways that things are done. Maybe that's liturgy, maybe that's mode of communion, maybe that's, things like that. So can you guys think of some preferential things that we would say, well, let's not make a judgment on whether it is good or a bad thing to choose a church or leave a church based on that. But what are some preferential things that you can have a problem with at your church?
I think the one I hear most is style of worship.
Okay.
Depending on where you're at, we like contemporary, we like singing hymns, whatever it is. I think that's a big one that we hear a lot. And another one is just how like children's programs are run.
Okay. Yeah.
Do they say for the service for singing? Do they start in the beginning? Are they learning? Are they playing games?
Right. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Those are some programmatic preferential things for sure.
Yeah, I was thinking style of worship. I've been at churches that tried to fix that by having a different style for 3 services on a Sunday morning. You got your traditional, contemporary, and then a blended mix. So there's churches that try to combat that, you mentioned even just mode of communion. And it's not the, the importance of communion, the like what communion really is. It is, man, do we do the little pods or do we do the rip and dip? Do we do a wafer? Are we coming up to the front? I've seen churches that I've been a part of, do we come up to the front and take communion with the pastor and then go back to the seat? Or is it just it being passed around to us? And that's like, I've seen it change from one to the other. And that's a big, big deal for some people. Those are, growing up, it was the worship part. It was what style of worship is it? And it really wasn't like, oh, is the preaching like theologically, like is it Is it biblically based preaching? Is it like rooted in the Bible? Also, it was, what's the music?
Yeah.
Like, what
Yep.
is the style of music? Oh,
Yep.
contemporary, that's not right. Do we do hymns? All that kind of stuff. Or is there an organ being played? That's a huge one.
Okay. So I echo these that you guys are saying. I mean, you hear about worship wars, right?
Yeah.
Being fought. I can't believe we're getting rid of the organ. I can't believe we're getting rid of the piano. I can't believe they added a drum kit. I can't believe there's no choir. I can't believe there's no praise team. I can't believe, okay, easy, So worship wars are a big one. I think there are preaching wars. Let's not throw the category of biblical or unbiblical, but let's throw the category of biblically expository preaching or biblically topical preaching. I think both can be biblically done. So I think there's preaching wars, like you said. There's kids ministry wars and youth ministry wars, and let me throw one out there, and you guys tell me what you think. And I think I already mentioned this in passing, but would you put church size in this category as a preferential category? Because the next category will be the essentials. Okay.
Right.
So these are essentials. But is church size something that's preference based?
I'm going to say yes.
Okay.
I think it's a preference.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that makes me think, okay, if someone's shopping around for churches, like that, yeah, you have a preference of, I'm looking for a smaller church or I'm looking for a mega church. And then you get like, you might get those people who are like, I'm looking for that small church, that small tight knit community.
Mm-hmm.
Then they're there for, 3-4 years. And that church has grown a bunch, maybe doubles in size, and does not feel like that small church anymore. And it because it has grown, like,
right.
Like you hope churches do, it like grows. Then I do feel like some of those people might be like, I liked what it used to be. Right. I like that small, I'm going to go find another small church until it gets big again. And there's issues, so many issues with that too.
Yeah. Church size is an interesting one because big churches only get big by people going to them. Mm-hmm. Small churches, the minute you go to them because they're small, you've just made them less small. Right. So it's I understand that, yes, it is a preference, but I would hope it's not the preference for your church, experience. But now here's the question. As we've talked about superficial, we're talking about preferential. We're going to move to essential. Okay. But preferential category. What if you got a problem with a preference of your church? Is this are these deal breaker things? Are preferences deal breakers for, I got a problem here. You took my pews away. Or maybe that's too superfluous. I got a problem here. We moved from really, really contemporary worship, like, Hillsong Top 40, to a bit more modern hymns and a bit more, reflection. Or Kyle, what you said about communion, we are no longer doing the pods. We've moved to intinction, or we're trying something else out. You got to come up front and receive it from somebody instead of doing it kind of more reflectively on your own. I don't know. So are preferential reasons good reasons to break fellowship with a church?
I think preferences are helpful when you're looking for a church and you have lots of choice, like you're trying to narrow it down. So I think like that's where the preference comes in. But I think once you're in a church and if you've committed to commit, then it feels like that reason isn't a great reason to leave.
I would agree.
Okay. That's fair.
Just in the sense of like, yeah, like if you are kind of that, like if you've got your list and you're kind of church shopping a little bit like that, like I totally understand that that's like, oh man, they just changed that. I'd rather not. Then sure. And like Karina said, you're not going to find that perfect church that's going to fit all those things. So you have to be aware of that. But if you have man, if you have put some roots down and made a church your home, and you're like, this is where we're going, maybe you've even become a member of the church. We talk about church membership all the time here. And it's like, if you are committed to a church, and something like that, not to say like if you're committed to a church and one of those things changes, you shouldn't have any problem with that at all. Like you should just go like zip your mouth and that's just how it's going to be. Like I feel like you can still have legitimate like, like problems. Like, oh, it's a bummer that you changed communion. Like I've got to go up front or like that. Then to me, it's all about how do you voice that problem? What do you do with it? That can really be a big issue if you're not careful with it. If that is your home church and something changes or they're growing or something like that, and you have a problem with it, I feel like there is a good and bad way to deal with that.
Okay. Let's talk essentials then.
Mm-hmm.
If we move out of preference and we move into essentials, now some people are going to argue that there are some that are going to be borderline on both of those. Okay. Biblical essentials. So let's not talk essentials as in like, obviously heresy is,
I was going to say,
right. Like that's easy. I'm starting to talk about like more centralized doctrines, even if they're secondary doctrines, but they're more central and core to the identity of a particular movement. So let me give some examples. Baptism. Do you practice believers' baptism or do you practice baby baptism, infant baptisms? That, while we can agree that is not a deal breaker for one's orthodoxy, like you're a Christian if you believe in infant baptism or believers' baptism, but that's a huge difference. That's a big difference. Maybe not for some, but for a lot, that's a big difference. That feels like more of a bigger issue. Issues on, I do think mode of preaching is probably a bigger issue. We are pretty well rooted in expository book through book kind of preaching here at Fathom. And if I left and somebody else came in and they were just pure topical preaching, even if it's biblical topical preaching, I think people would have a harder time with that. So let's talk then about what are some of the bigger ticket kind of more essential things that if you started having a problem with that, maybe it's mode of leadership, maybe it's, I don't know. Let's talk through some of those things. Because Karina, you already mentioned that you guys left a church because you didn't agree with either something that was being taught. Are we talking like heresy, or was it like, yeah, that's just not really the flavor of Protestant evangelical Christianity that we're about?
Yeah, I don't think it was heresy, but it was just, we just felt like it wasn't grounded in the Bible.
Okay.
It was more preaching off emotion.
Okay.
I don't know if that's the way to say it. It felt less rooted in the Bible.
Yeah.
And that was hard for us.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah. You brought up leadership. I think that's a big thing. Whether you're elder led, whether you're got deacons, staff, whatever it is, that is a big, and also like communicating that clearly of like, this is what the leadership is, this is what the leadership does. I think that can be a big thing.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is like, there's so many churches are all very different in that.
Yeah.
So that's one that I thought of.
Yeah, I think a deal breaker for some people can be the transparency of how decisions are made, what decisions are being made, who's leading what. Even financial transparency. These are important things. So I bring all these things up, all these different things up, because I think there is a spectrum, and I think it's really a wisdom issue for a person who is either trying to find a new church or somebody who's trying to discern whether they need to move on from their current church. So let's talk about those with the remaining time we have. Let's talk about those kinds of two categories. Okay. Karina, based on your experience, and we'll pass this question to Kyle too, but you've already mentioned that your story was, I had the huge list.
Mm-hmm.
Coach us on, if we're looking for a new church, should we have a list?
Mm-hmm.
If we have a list, should we have how many things on that list? Walk us through, like, ultimately where you guys landed and what you might advise somebody else to.
So yeah, we had this unrealistic list. And once I began to realize I was looking for heaven in a church, we began to pray over our list and like seeking God to like show us where, which ones were unmovable. And for us, it basically came down to this like statement of faith. Like we would read a church's statement of faith, and that's actually not even how we found Fathom. We were also just praying that God would direct us. And in the same day, 2 separate people who don't know each other said we should go to Fathom. So sometimes God does just prompt you in a certain direction. But we had just taken our list and kind of taken out all the things that were just really silly. And even it could have felt like worship style. We were like, at the end of the day, is that really what we want to draw our line? So there was things that we had really hard conversations about, and things that we really like in a church, or things that we prefer. And we realized that we were just looking for a good experience and not necessarily a place to call church home.
That's a huge, I think that I want to highlight that. Man, is it so tempting to pick a church based on your experience of that church rather than based on, is this the right home? So like when you're shopping for a home, flippers know this, house flippers know this, and they can make the home feel like the experience of the home is, this is cool. Oh, everything's gray, right? Like they just, oh man, there's shiplap everywhere. Like whatever the trendy thing is, and they can make it look really good, but is it the right home? Have you checked out the foundation? Are the walls straight? Like, is this the right neighborhood? Like, those are the things, not just, oh, I think that, did you see that deep freeze, fridge? Oh, that was awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah. That's superficial. So I think that's a really big deal, is moving past just what you experience to, could this be a home? What about you, Kyle?
Yeah. Well, and I think I want to mention, so like, I think that definitely takes some time. I mean, when you're shopping for a church home, it's really hard to go to a church one Sunday and then be like, I can make a complete judgment on this church off of one Sunday, yay or nay. Like, yeah, if you stick around, like, that's what I'm saying is like, go to a church a few different weeks, like stick it, like go there for a full month, because they might be doing like a different sort of Sunday, the pastor might be on sabbatical or something like last summer or something. But it's like, it really is like, you're not gonna, if you're really looking for a church home and looking for a place to go deeper and to find a place where you can invest in it, it doesn't help just showing up one time for an hour and making a judgment on that. But I do like, I like Karina's list, because I feel like she did also like some of them. She was like, okay, these are silly, but you still have your things that you're non-negotiables, that you're like, no, this is what we're looking for. And you just kind of, the other things you can quote unquote like deal with for some time. And you might end up like that, if that's where God wants you and that's the church home for you, and if it's your family, like I feel like that is a place where God wants you. So if it's style of music, like, man, he's still gonna speak to you, if whether it's hymns or whether it's contemporary stuff. And so I think that's a good thing to, man, you can have your list, and you should have some of those things on there that are, this is what I'm not going to budge with, but knowing that, hey, there's some other things that, I'd like a huge building too. But it's like, yeah, but maybe that's not that's not ideal for everybody looking for a church. Right. But I would say, like, I really would say, man, you got to give a church time. You got to give it some time to really feel out how, and you talked about foundation, everything like that. Like, you might need to see, You might need to see the church go through a difficult time, go through some difficult decisions or something, and see how they come out the other end of it. Like
Yep.
that's part of being a part of a church. And you need to see those kind of deeper, kind of foundational pieces to it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is good, really good, important advice for folks. I always, when I do counseling with folks who are trying to find a church, I always say you should have your non-negotiables. There should be a handful. And by that, I mean literally probably no more than 5. Probably 3 to 5 is where I would, it's got to be this kind of preaching. The music can't be trash. The community needs to be at least somewhat relevant to our age and stage, whatever those things are. You have your little, and it's just a small number of things. And then Kyle, to your point, I think sometimes you can walk into a church and know within a half second that it's not the right place.
Right.
But I think it takes a lot more discernment to know if it is the right place. And some people walk into a church the first time they're like, no, this is it. This is my home. And I hear that, but then hear me, you confirm that when you come back the next 6 or 7 times. So I do think that even if the first time is the best experience ever, you're still wise to say, and I'm going to keep coming just because I want to see what kind of crazy I'm walking into here, So I think that's really good. Really good advice for our friends. Now let's do the other side of this. When is it okay to leave a church? And how do we do that? We're going to have to be brief with this. We could do a whole podcast just on this, but when is it okay? And how do you do that best?
I think you're going to find, that's the thing is we've established churches change. You can, overnight, the worship can be different. Overnight, the children's program can be different. So you have your non-negotiables. And I think when your non-negotiables, your handful changes, that's when you have to step back and evaluate. For us, like I said, when we were coming into here, we really were just praying and we really just felt like God saying the church that you go to, you're going to commit to. So don't commit to a church until you're just ready to commit for the long haul. And so, you just kind of dig deep and just know any church is going to have ups and downs, and you can just keep hopping to churches in good seasons. But I don't think that gives you the full picture of the church.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say it's okay to leave a church. Really when one of those of your handful of non-negotiables, if it changes to the extent where you don't feel like you could adapt to it. And I think even more importantly, especially those non-negotiables, like if they stop teaching out of the Bible, like those sorts of things, like that is when you are like, you should leave a church. But I also feel like, man, if you have your family at a church and you've kind of gone all in and some of your non-negotiables start changing and that affects your family and they're getting biblical truth teaching each week. And, I just feel like those are instances where you're like, no, we can leave. I don't know. The hard question is what you just asked then is how do you leave a church? Yeah. That's a tough one.
Yeah. So I do think there are good and right reasons, some of which you said. I think life stage change is an okay reason to leave. Right. Like I would want, we've had people leave Fathom because our youth group isn't big enough. And it's like, they want a big youth group experience for their kids. And it's like, we're not going to have a huge youth group anytime, like a huge youth group, like 100 kids, with like a helicopter. It's just not going to happen anytime soon. So, we need families though, who are going to say, hey, we're here to develop, right? Like we're going to be, and those are the kinds of families that we've got to have. So I do think it's okay to do those things. I think you're right. Your handful of things. What I liked, Karina, what you said was, if one of your essentials, one of your non-negotiables, begins to change, to reflect on that, to talk about that, to pray about that, to really do some heart work and to do some relationship work with the leadership of your church to say, maybe it's not as big of a deal. I hear from people all the time, man, I love the size of Fathom. So like, if it doubles, are you gone? Maybe that was one of your non-negotiables when finding a church, and maybe that changes once you've found one. Like, I think that's okay too. So back then to Kyle's question, what do you do? How do you leave? Well, I think you do your due diligence in relationship. First of all, if changes are happening and you don't like them, talk about them.
Mm-hmm.
Don't just ghost the church.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, golly, people ghost the church all the time. It's the ongoing joke. People vote with their feet. That's dumb.
Mm-hmm.
That's not how godly, mature adults deal with displeasure in a local body and in a relationship. You actually deal with it. It's back to our stress podcast. Back to our relationships, conflict relationship podcast. You don't just run. Don't just ghost people. Don't just, unfriend them from Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
Communicate. Have those conversations. Sit down. And if there are irreconcilable differences, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But especially if you've been at a place for a while, and especially if you are a member, do the hard work of saying, hey, we're moving on. Here's why. And do that communication. And again, back to our conflict, 7 out of 10 times, I'm sure that conversation goes well.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes somebody's going to be offended, but 7 out of 10 times, hopefully it ends amicably.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and that's super important, because most likely if you are a member of a church, especially like if that is your church home, you're a member of the church, you've been there for a while, like you have people, you have, whether it's volunteers, even staff, an elder team, lead pastors, like who care about you, that want to talk with you through this. And it's not like what can we do to keep you to stay? It's like hey, you have conflict. We care about, like, we actually really do care about you because you're part of our church. And so, yeah, we want to talk through these things with you, and not just have you be like, see you, where did this person go?
Well, and just here's a little trick of the trade to our church. If you come to our church and you say, hey, I came from this church or that church, I know most of those pastors,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll be on the horn with them and say, hey, I just met this so-and-so.
Right.
I'm going to follow up.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because I want to know if there's unresolved conflict.
Mm-hmm.
One, because I need to know what kind of crazy is coming in here.
Yep.
We want you to know the kind of crazy you're walking into, and we need to know the kind of crazy that's walking into here.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're
Everyone's
the
great.
person who's burning bridges left and right and down the center, man, we're going to protect the flock
Mm-hmm.
at a certain level from that. So we don't need to go into all of that, but I just think there's a good and right way to do
Mm-hmm.
this. But I want to direct you. I know you were just about to say something, so if it's not this, but Karina, will you tell us the benefits? You have been here for almost the life of this church. I think you came at the end of the first year
Mm-hmm.
of our church,
Mm-hmm.
and you've been through ups and downs at our church. Talk to us, and then you can add whatever else you want to. Talk to us about the benefits of committing to a church in season and out,
Mm-hmm.
in the good times and the bad times, even if there are secondary or tertiary things that are out of whack or
Mm-hmm.
changing or moving. What has that been for
Mm-hmm.
you and for your family?
Yeah. And we have, even with our kids, I would say everyone in our family has probably experienced highs and lows in this church.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, like I said earlier, it just shows you a better picture of the church. We are all still broken, and to sit here and not acknowledge that even myself is broken, then, when you walk into a church, you're automatically elevating yourself as something who's superior. And so just to be part of a church who can be real with each other, who can stand by each other, it's a sense of community that if you're just jumping every 2 years to a different church, you're never really going to have the chance to go deeper with certain people within the church. You're never going to be able to go through conflict resolution as a church member in a church. You're never going to be able to see the highs that come out of low seasons. And so I think really just experiencing the full picture of what the church is on earth, and just knowing, hey, I could go to another church and it's going to fall apart at some point. It's going to be broken at some point. There's going to be conflict at some point. And so just being able to dig in and just know, like, hey, this is where I call home. And it's like with your kids. Every time my kids mess up, I'm like, go hop out of the house. You're out for the next 2 years. Sorry.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's at some level, it's a lesser covenant, but it's a covenant. That's why we talk about covenant membership. It's better or worse, sickness and health, not till death do us part. It's not quite as heavy as that. And I know some guys will push back on that, but that's how we see it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a family. Yeah.
And I think regardless, I mean, we're a church in Littleton, but we're part of the church. So by going to another church, we are still the church. You're still connected to the body of Christ, and we have to work together. So that's like leaving with conflict. You're not really resolving conflict because it's still part of the church.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
So there you go, people. If you
There you
needed an excuse to leave a church, leave our church. We've teed you up, but you've got to send us an email then. So
Our ceiling height is not changing. We're not getting more windows, all that stuff. Hey, but if you have any questions, church, reach out to us, reach out to our staff, our elders. We would love to talk you through these sorts of things, but thank you guys for this discussion. Thank you, church, for listening, and we'll catch you next time.